Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course talk about the Steam Machine. So this thing, we're getting another one. We haven't seen Steam Machine in roughly a decade from the last iteration, and I want to go over some of the stuff with the older Steam Machine, some of the issues that kind of was the resistance that we're still going to kind of see today. And while I definitely think the Steam Machine is good, I think the competition is good of Steam OS and Linux against Windows, and just all PC gaming is pretty much Windows still. It's a massive amount. It's like 97% or something like that. It's really high still, but I still want to make sure that people that are maybe thinking of getting one, or maybe more console players, still understand exactly what the Steam Machine is and some of the imperfections or things you're going to have to deal with, because I don't want people to spend their money and realize, wow, yeah, this totally isn't for me. I just wish people to be informed. So, and then too, if you have experience with the past or the current one or some other information that I don't mention today, please leave it down in the comments, because yeah, I wish this to be a discussion. So let's start with the Steam Machine itself. So yeah, it's designed to operate SteamOS to provide a home game console-like experience, which is what this next iteration of Steam Machine is for. And the first iteration was developed in collaboration with several computer vendors. This time, this current SteamOS is being developed, as far as we know, just by Valve themselves. It was also Valve also ended up developing their own versions of the Steam Machine for retail, offering additional options on top of Valve's requirements, such as dual booting options for Windows, which they didn't all do. You can read this in its entirety if you'd like, the webpage. But yeah, also the ability to upgrade the computer. The second iteration was developed by Valve themselves. Steam, a digital video game storefront, offered many third-party publisher titles and was developed by Steam primarily for Windows, and counted for estimated 75% of digitally purchased games on that platform in 2023. I will say, though, for console, it was actually less at the time, because console has still been a big focus of physical games. People still like their physical games, especially on the Nintendo side, but now that everything has been shifting and switching, I mean, I think it's 82 or 85% of all purchases across all platforms now are basically all digital, and physical has really fizzled out on Xbox. It also looks that way now too, with the whole keycard situation for Nintendo, and then also for third-party games, it still isn't a guarantee that actually all of the data is going to be on the disc for PlayStation 5, or any of that actually going forward. So I think that's a lot more acceptable now. Upon release, Windows 8 2012, Valve CEO Gabe Newell called it a catastrophe for everyone on the PC space, and it was. I mean, Windows 8 was really for like touchscreens and phones and that kind of thing, and yeah, it was such a frustrating thing. But anyway, that's a whole nother video. And then also, promoting the open-sourced operating system Linux that would maintain the openness of the platform. So yeah, Newell recognized that games would need to be a significant part of the push for Linux. Because, yeah, Linux, you can basically do whatever you want. You can customize stuff. You have a lot more access and stuff. Windows is extremely locked down, and also has a ton of stuff you really don't need with all of the kind of legacy type of software and everything. Gabe Newell explained that Valve's strategy was to develop a single hardware unit themselves as a default model, initially named as Bigfoot, to work with other computer manufacturers who want to offer the same user experience, but with different hardware configurations not offered by Valve's model. The first set of Steam machines, Steam controllers, and Steam Links were available for consumers' purchase and delivery starting in November 10th of 2015. Several game websites observed that by April of 2018, Valve no longer offered links to the Steam Machine section on the Steam storefront, and while it could be reached directly via URL, many of the models previously offered were no longer listed. Valve responded that they recognized that the Steam Machine was not selling well and saw little user traffic. So why is that? Let's dig into that. A part of it, too, was also just the Steam controller. Okay, the main focus was like the trackpads, and not everyone liked that. So yeah, the current Steam controller that we're going to have is going to feel a lot more like a PlayStation 5 or with something that people are used to, and also going to feel more kind of like an Elite as well, like with the Xbox Elite controller with back buttons and all of that. Through the vendors, the price range of these first machines ranged from basically $500 to $6,000. So the price was pretty high, and the price too was basically right up there with the current Xbox One and also PlayStation. So yeah, the PlayStation 4 was basically $400, and the Xbox One was $500. We also had Pro versions a little bit later that were roughly around the same cost or a little bit higher. Like I think the Xbox One X was $600, and then I think the PlayStation 4 Pro was still like $400 or $500. And so that was still a pretty good deal for a much beefier hardware. But again, that wasn't necessarily the case for Steam. There were so many different versions and iterations, it was getting confusing for people. So it was kind of nice just to have one particular box. And part of the thing too is that, with the price, you were getting basically a plug and play design, and that isn't necessarily what was exactly happening with SteamOS, as this was the first real iteration. It was a good step forward, but yeah, this was definitely a learning curve, not just for the vendors, but for Valve as well. The official release of the Steam machines in November of 15, both Falcon, Northwest, and Origin PC opted to not ship the SteamOS enabled machine in 2015 due to limitations of SteamOS over Windows. So again, there were limitations with the system, and we're going to go over some of those limitations that still exist today, though it is definitely a lot better with the Proton layer. Falcon Northwest says they would consider shipping machines with SteamOS in the future if performance improved, because yeah, it wasn't great. But this was one of the necessary things that vendors had to do was the dual boot, and again, some of those vendors didn't do that. So yeah, Valve was even losing control a little bit over what vendors were doing with their own machine. By June 16, 7 months after official release, fewer than 500,000 units had sold. Many vendors discontinued selling the Steam machine by the end of 2016 because again, they just weren't selling. However, as of 17, some were still offering them for sale. SteamOS itself was not as ready for everyday use in gameplay in its initial builds. Valve has been unresponsive at times towards the Steam machine makers to release updates, while Microsoft had announced a free rollout of Windows 10 because, yeah, Windows 8 was not received very well, and then the Steam machine was, I think, too, applying some pressure, just like they will this time. So yeah, the rollout of Windows 10 making that an incentive over Valve software. Valve also delayed the Steam controller release to 2015, which also subsequently delayed the Steam machine release by roughly, I think it was about a year. And so again, yeah, they weren't expecting for it to come out in 15 as much, but yeah, their own version of it was delayed for the Steam machine, which was pretty frustrating. But yeah, the vendors were able to get out there first, but then it was so convoluted with all the different price points, all of the different everything. It's like everyone was used to basically one box from one particular company. Well, we never really had original equipment manufacturers before in the space, except for just PC. And yeah, thankfully, though, we are bridging the gap today between that. Steam machine vendors simply found that there was not a great market for the product since it was still trying to bridge consoles and home computers, while they found that most consumers would flock to one extreme or the other. And I think that is the thing that is most important to understand this time with the Steam machine itself that we're going to be getting. So I do think the Steam Machine 2 basically will be a lot more successful this time, but though it's not without resistance. There will be a console-ish experience. It will be better. It will also play more games with the Proton layer, and you're not going to have the bulky PC for Steam. It is also open. You can tweak and tinker a lot of stuff if you wish, but I think, too, they're trying to ensure that it is a lot more consolidated or streamlined this time, and that's why Valve is just making the Steam machine right now. Maybe in the future they will have OEMs again, but yeah, we don't have any word on that as of right now. But yeah, still, this won't necessarily be a plug-and-play experience exactly like what the console users are used to, and this is really why I'm making this video. Because a lot of videos right now are saying, hey, it's amazing, it's great, but we just don't know the price. Well, I think it's a little deeper than that, and that's what we're going to go into. Though, to be honest, this isn't going to replace the best place to play, which is still going to be your Windows PC. So the Steam machine is still going to be good. It's still going to be probably at a cheaper price point than what you have, but you already have, if you're already using Steam, you already have a PC or a pretty good laptop that's probably cost you around $1,500 or $2,000 maybe at some point whenever you bought it, and then you can upgrade stuff as you need. And again, the Steam machine is supposed to be another bridge between console and PC users. So let's go ahead and actually watch Gamers Nexus here.
For normalizing how well so many games run through Proton. Although we had issues in some instances, it's still largely true that it's just a lot better than it used to be. As Steam Deck users are aware, some anti-cheat software flat out refuses to run, which means the games can refuse to run. We dropped F124 immediately for this reason. This is the only game from our suite that was affected by this, but since anti-cheat is usually associated with popular mainstream games, this remains one of the most significant obstacles to Linux gaming. Our two RE engine games, Resident Evil 4 and Dragon's Dogma 2, didn't show any options for ray tracing. It's a known issue, and it may be possible to work around, but not without a level of tweaking that we're trying to avoid for purposes of maintaining a sterile test environment. We're skipping RT tests for these two games on Linux until Capcom figures it out. A few Steam games have native Linux branches, which Steam always prioritizes for download on Linux. Unfortunately, sometimes the native Linux versions suck, not necessarily for any reason other than the developers decided to make them that way. In the case of Total War Warhammer 3, the Linux build lags significantly behind the Windows version. It looks like most users opt to run the Windows build through Proton instead, so that's what we ended up testing. Baldur's Gate 3 is another game in our suite with a native Linux version, although it only came out after we had already started testing, and it promptly broke desktop Linux installs because Larian forgot about non-Steam Deck Linux users. This distributor-side messiness will become more common as the Steam ecosystem expands. We also found that the full screen mode in Baldur's Gate 3 would always run at the native display resolution regardless of in-game settings, specifically with the Linux build. With Cyberpunk 2077, with our RT medium settings profile applied, we'd consistently get crashes on the second loading screen, specifically the second one. We could load a save once, but trying to reload or exit to the menu would crash the game pretty much every time. With our non-RT settings profile applied, this didn't happen. We also had issues across multiple games that may have been caused by low VRAM. For example, the RTX 5060 was able to struggle through Total War Warhammer 3 testing at 1080p. But it completely failed to get past the benchmark loading screen at any higher resolution. Intel's cards had the most problems in general, although we were told by Bazite's developers that Intel GPUs would be the most affected by updates. So, pausing updates may have prevented some fixes, but that's the trade-off we have to make. They were only paused for a couple weeks here. Using the B580, the native Linux version of Baldur's Gate 3 wouldn't launch. Dragon's Dogma 2 couldn't run long enough to be benchmarked, and Starfield couldn't load saves. And if Starfield can't load something, that's really saying something. We also saw flickering and artifacts at desktop. None of the games in our test suite showed RT as an option with Intel, except Cyberpunk 2077, and when we moved down to the B570, it couldn't even run Cyberpunk with RT without crashing. Now, to be fair, Cyberpunk with RT crashed consistently on the RX 9060 XT as well, but Intel has some special considerations here. We also had games freeze for up to a minute at a time, which could be worked around by tabbing out and tabbing back in. We intentionally hid the Mango HUD overlay during all the testing because of an earlier issue on the Steam Deck where any overlays would cause stuttering and other issues. Steam's first time shader compilation step took an extremely long time, especially with NVIDIA cards, up to 25 minutes for Starfield, for example, on one of the NVIDIA cards we tested. Many of the Steam games we tested forced tiny shader cache updates every day, which is behavior we've seen on the Steam Deck as well.
One thing, and one kind of continuing issue on SteamOS these days, is the proliferation of kernel-level anti-cheat in multiplayer titles. Valve has worked with some developers who use kernel-level anti-cheat to remove that functionality for their games on Steam Deck, on SteamOS, but it really does require cooperation from the developers. So titles like Battlefield 6, they're not going to run on this thing flat out. Like without some kind of workaround for this kernel-level anti-cheat or a different accommodation for Linux devices, that's just not going to happen right on this device. So that's a potential issue. And in general, when I go through my Steam library, I would say about 20%, maybe 20%, maybe 15% of those titles do not currently work on Steam Deck, like flat out do not work or have some great functionality issue. So I would say that like with this device, again, another issue relative to that console experience is not every game you download, not every game you own is going to run on this thing, right? Whereas with a Windows device, you'd have a greater understanding that it could probably run just about anything you wanted to throw on it.
Yeah.
Right? That is a level of flexibility you're not going to get on this device.
So hearing from Gamers Nexus, certainly there's going to be issues still running Linux, and hopefully SteamOS can kind of work through some of this or curate the experience a little bit better. And not having to fiddle with different issues or different settings and all of that stuff, because that's not really what console players are generally looking for. With a few 100 million of them. Excuse me. And then also with Digital Foundry, with their experience with the Steam machine, when it launches in the first quarter of 2026, Oliver is also explaining that basically not every single game is actually going to run, and that's what I mentioned in my previous video that I had. And so, yeah, this is not going to be like a perfect experience. I just want to ensure that people actually know and understand that, because this isn't being covered extensively well through a lot of videos that I've been seeing. And we're getting to a point where the Steam Machine is kind of more hyped um, than actually talking about what is the experience and what to kind of expect. I feel like the expectations are getting a little higher than maybe what they should be, and that's why I'm making this video. Also, another issue too is that the RAM cost. We're hearing that right now, that just in the last couple of months, is that the RAM is getting pretty expensive due to data center demand, whether it's from OpenAI or Microsoft or Google or whoever. They're all basically buying RAM sets, and this is roughly around, some even sticks are up 200 or like 300% roughly compared to what they were just a couple of months ago. So it is getting very, very expensive, and this is going to affect any device that is going to be manufactured that basically has RAM going forward. And we don't know too for how long, because again, the demand for AI right now is not slowing down, and then the manufacturing can't really keep up with the demand. And these big companies, they're going to buy massive swaths, or they're just going to buy the dies or whatever, and they're going to buy the chips or the wafers even before they're really finished, to ensure that they actually have that, and that's really going to shrink what the supply is going to be for gaming. And so this is going to affect the Switch 2, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and of course too, the Steam Machine. This is also going to affect like GPU cards and whatever. So maybe if you're kind of in the market for one, or if you've been thinking of upgrading, maybe now would be the time to actually buy one. But that's not purchasing advice necessarily. That's just what personally I would be doing, is actually maybe buying one right now, if I plan on upgrading within 6-12 months, just to ensure that you actually have one. So yeah, we're likely to see price increases again across some of the existing hardware for some of these platforms, and for some of the software that's already been, or hardware that's already been out there for like GPUs and stuff. So yeah, the cost of RAM is not going to make this easier. Maybe this is why too we don't really have a price yet for the Steam Machine, because maybe they were thinking around $500-600. But again, if RAM is going to cost hundreds of percent more for each unit, well then they also got to raise that cost too for right now. And also it's going to raise the cost likely of GPUs as well, with VRAM and all of that other kind of stuff. So this is this is not really kind of a great time in that sense to be launching a new console-like experience. Steam Machine 2 will also be, thankfully, a more curated experience. Again, it does have that Proton layer to run games more easily, but again, as we're seeing, it's still not exactly perfect. There's still going to be some of those issues. And then we're seeing, too, again, with Digital Foundry saying that basically not everything is going to run. Either it's not necessarily going to run those games, or kernel anti-cheat is also going to be a problem, which are really the top games on pretty much every single platform. We know that Counter-Strike Go is going to run, of course, which is still the number one, I think, on Steam, but a lot of the other games that are still out there aren't going to really be working too well. And then there's still going to be other games that have issues, because again, they just didn't really make them for Linux, or they kind of forgot about it, or there's just shader issues and whatever. So yeah, there's still going to be some tinkering going around, and we'll have to see exactly how everything runs with Steam. But yeah, it's not as maybe easy as some of us think going forward. One thing that is nice is, again, everything is basically just being made by Valve. That's going to streamline the process. They're going to be able to, I think, fix things faster. The issue with the previous vendors that they had coming out first and then coming out with their own is that it's like, okay, there's so many different versions of the Steam Machine, and not everything can really get fixed, and there was a lot of moving parts. And I think this time, just Valve actually making the machine first and maybe OEMs later is a much better idea, because they can work out all of the bugs, and then they can say, look, these are the requirements for the vendors, and now you can go out and make your OEMs. And I think that's a really good idea. And still, yeah, the real question that we have is the price, and ultimately we just don't really know. We do know that the price will be priced as a PC and not as a console. So again, I think, 500 is really out of the question. Maybe for the 512 gigabyte version, but for the 2 terabyte, yeah. I mean, we're going to be talking about some serious money. And this isn't likely to be subsidized either. I don't think they're going to kind of lower the price and subsidize and think, okay, yeah, with some sales, we can kind of make some of that money back, because they don't necessarily operate as a closed ecosystem like with Steam. But because you can technically use the Steam Machine for anything else, or in some other capacity, or as a workstation or something like that. And I don't think everyone's going to do that, but they still got to think about this as a business. So I do think the Steam Machine will have kind of an approved program or a use or like a verified list for Steam Deck, or at least you could use the Steam Deck verification program to see if maybe games are actually going to run well or whatever, because that still is updated, I think, pretty regularly still. And we're also going to be looking at a Steam Deck 2 in the future, probably within the rest of this decade. And yeah, Oliver said that roughly 15-20% of the games aren't necessarily going to run that he owns in his current library or that are going to work on the Steam Machine. And so, yeah, I think ultimately the Steam Machine will be for those that want a more console-like experience, that already have a Steam library, that which there's 135 million monthly active users on Steam, so there's plenty of people. But they also have to have some extra money for a second PC. And want an easier way of just kind of jumping in and playing some games that they want to focus on. But again, it's not really going to be the multiplayer stuff. It's not really going to be maybe some of the older games that maybe won't run, or even some of the newer stuff that are having some performance issues. It still might be a better experience on their actual PC. So I still think we're going to sell like a few million units of this thing. But no, I don't think this is going to necessarily be competitive with like Xbox numbers or PlayStation numbers or especially Nintendo, or even with the next gen stuff that we're going to be seeing. I don't think they'll get to those type of numbers because, again, there are all of these kind of resistances with the Steam Machine. Now, I think the controller is definitely going to be better, but that's also going to be a cost as well. And yeah, we're probably looking at $100 for that, maybe a little bit more. Hopefully not any more than that, because that's already the most expensive controller that we have, which is the Joy-Con 2s. But yeah, I really just want people to understand that this is not going to be like a perfect gaming console experience, that there's going to be some bugs, that there's going to be games that aren't going to work. There are some things that you can upgrade, but it's really only going to be your RAM and your SSD if you wish. And then, yeah, the price too is going to be priced as a PC. And then the RAM issue, supply chain issues, is going to be a problem. And I think Valve understands this because they're wanting to launch this before the next gen consoles actually come out. Right? It's the same type of strategy with Nintendo, is that they know that they can't really compete on the same level with the demand of the other consoles. And so when they all release at the same time, people choose either PlayStation or Xbox over everything else. And so that's why we see Nintendo staggering release a few years before the next generation, and we see Valve doing that with the Steam Machine this time too. So I definitely think they will get more sales, but I don't think a lot of console players are going to blip over because, again, it's not quite the experience that they're wanting. And at least too with Xbox and with even some things that we're hearing from PlayStation right now with the future, is that the future looks more like there's going to be this kind of cross-meshing of libraries or purchases, while also having your library for your console games there. And so if you're already going to be meshing and kind of integrating stuff with kind of the omni or all platform type of models, then you're not really going to need one particular thing over the other. You're not going to need an Xbox or a PlayStation or a Steam Machine or a PC or a handheld. You can basically pick which way you want to go forward, and you're going to be able to access a lot of your games. And that, I think, ultimately is going to be the future, is going to be the accessibility. So not everyone's going to want to choose this, and that's totally okay. I still think it's really good that the Steam Machine is here, that they're trying again, that they have the Proton layer now so they can play a lot more games and make it easier. I think the changes and design changes that they've had for the Steam Machine, also the Steam controller, are also good. We'll see what the prices are. I think that'll be kind of steep for people because, yeah, life is really expensive right now at the end of 2025, and it doesn't really seem to be getting any better. But yeah, I think going forward it will sell enough. And again, I want people to understand that this isn't going to be like a perfect experience. Folks that use Linux all the time, we're used to that, right? We already know this is why we're really excited about it, but also a lot of videos that are coming out are actually done by Linux guys that like Linux a lot over Windows. But again, the average or kind of general console user, they don't really know much about this, and that's why this video exists. So if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and help me out. Let the algorithm know that you liked it. Whichever way you would like, it'd be perfectly fine. And then also share the content with other people that are maybe thinking, or that are thinking of maybe possibly buying one, just to ensure that we get all of the information here so that people can make the best decision with their money. Because let's be honest, when you're spending something now that's hundreds or maybe even almost $1,000, and then you don't like it, that is a much bigger deal in 2025 than it was back in 2015. So with that, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the next one.